The eviction came on a Wednesday, just after breakfast. Franklin Moore had just poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs when the knock sounded at the door, a single, hesitant rap that somehow already felt like goodbye. On the porch stood their son, Travis. He couldn't meet their eyes. "There's no easy way to say this," he mumbled, holding out a letter with the town's legal seal. "It's not personal, Dad. It's just what makes sense now." Franklin didn't take the letter. He didn't need to. He could read every word of it on his son's face. Evelyn stood behind him in her robe, silent, still. Her eyes didn't water. That would come later. For now, she only placed a hand on Franklin's shoulder, like a nurse preparing someone for pain. Scout, their 10-year-old golden retriever, growled low. It wasn't vicious, just protective, like he knew something sacred was being torn apart. They had bought the house together, back when Travis had convinced them to co-sign the mortgage for security. That was 4 years ago. Since then, he'd married, moved upstairs, and begun talking about investment potential like the living room was stock to be traded. 2 hours later, Franklin and Evelyn packed what they could into the back of Franklin's old Dodge pickup: blankets, the wedding quilt Evelyn's grandmother made in 1952, a bag of dog food, and a rusted red toolbox Franklin had owned since he was 19. Scout leapt into the cab without being called. He always knew when it was time to leave. They didn't say goodbye. The silence between parents and son had already turned into something permanent. That night, they slept parked behind a gas station off Route 9. The cold crept through the seams of the truck doors. Franklin's back ached from the contorted sleep, and Evelyn curled up with Scout in the back seat, the dog acting as heater, pillow, and anchor. 3 days, Franklin said the next morning. "Give me 3 days and I'll find something." Evelyn didn't reply. She just kept rubbing the thin gold ring on her finger, the one she had nearly pawned back in '87 when Franklin got laid off from the mill. By the 3rd day, Pine Hollow appeared like a memory they'd forgotten. The kind of town where nothing quite faded, but nothing moved forward either. 6 blocks of Main Street, 1 diner with a crooked sign, a grocery store that stocked more dust than bread. It felt like a place where time had gotten tired and laid down for a nap. They were passing the edge of town when Scout started barking. It wasn't random, not excited, not scared, focused. Franklin slowed the truck. Scout was standing on all fours in the cab, tail stiff, nose pointed to a path that veered into a thicket of sumac and overgrown pine. "You see something, boy?" Franklin asked. Scout barked once, sharp and low. They turned off the road and followed the gravel path as far as the truck could manage, tires crunching over broken bottles and old tin cans. At the end stood a structure so broken it barely deserved the word. A shack. Barely. The roof sagged like tired shoulders. Windows stared blankly, hollow. One corner had collapsed entirely, exposing insulation that had long since given up. But Scout jumped out before the engine stopped. He didn't sniff around like usual. He walked straight to what must have once been the front steps and sat. Then looked back, waiting. Franklin stepped out of the truck. His knees cracked like old floorboards. Evelyn followed slowly, her hand steadying herself on the door handle. She looked at the shack and exhaled like the wind had been knocked out of her. "It's not safe." "No, but it's ours if we want it." "That's not how property works, Frank." Franklin walked up to Scout, who hadn't moved. "This place picked us," he said. "Scout picked it." Evelyn scoffed, then looked at the dog. Scout's tail thumped once against the ground, like punctuation. "I don't believe in signs," she muttered. "Neither do I," Franklin said. "But I believe in this dog." Inside, the air smelled like rot and rain. Mold traced the corners. But something else was there too, something still alive. A stone fireplace sat intact against the far wall. The floor was warped but dry, and underneath the decay there were bones, strong ones, oak beams, hand-cut. Franklin ran his fingers along the frame and could feel the care someone once put into this place. "It can be saved," he said. "You sure?" "No, but I've built worse from less." Evelyn knelt near a pile of leaves blown in from the open door. She brushed them aside, then paused. Beneath was a quilt square, frayed, water-stained, but stitched with initials, R.H. She didn't know why, but it made her throat tighten. That night, they parked the truck near the shack, too afraid to sleep inside just yet. Scout curled between them. Rain started around midnight, soft and steady. But for the first time in 3 nights, none of them stirred at every passing headlight or engine growl. It was quiet, too quiet for fear. Franklin whispered into the dark. "If we're going to fall apart, Maggie, I'd rather do it trying to build something." Scout sighed, the kind of exhale that sounded like approval. That was the night the rebuild began. Not with a hammer, but with a dog's bark, and 2 people no one wanted anymore, deciding they still had something worth creating. The sun broke through the trees with the kind of cold, clear light that made even decay look honest. Franklin stood on the porch, if it could be called that, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing the warped edges of the roofline. Evelyn stayed by the truck, arms folded tight, watching him the way a nurse watches a patient who refuses rest. "This place isn't shelter," she said. "It's one hard wind from being a pile of firewood." Franklin didn't argue. Instead, he walked the perimeter, slowly, like he was surveying a crime scene. His boots crunched over broken shingles and pine needles. Scout padded behind him, nose low, tail flicking with quiet urgency. The shack leaned, but it didn't sag the way rot did. The structure hadn't given up. It had been abandoned. That made a difference to Franklin. Abandonment could be reversed, surrender couldn't. "Look at this," he called out, running his hand over one of the outer beams. "Oak, full dimension, not that synthetic garbage they sell nowadays." Evelyn didn't move. "Frank, the last time you touched a roof, you ended up on pain meds for 2 weeks." Scout barked once, short and sharp. Franklin turned. The dog had stopped by the east corner, near a cracked stone planter overtaken by weeds. His head was tilted, ears up, his body tense. "You smell something, boy?" Scout didn't move. Instead, he let out a low, rolling growl and pawed at the ground near a rotten plank. Franklin crossed the yard and knelt with difficulty, joints creaking. He brushed aside the leaves. The plank was loose, not just from age. Someone had pried it before, carefully. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, finally walking over. He lifted the plank. Underneath was a shallow cavity carved into the dirt, and inside it, resting on top of a moth-eaten blanket, was a wooden box about the size of a bread pan. Scout sat next to it, alert, as if guarding something sacred. Franklin lifted the box with both hands. It was heavier than he expected. A simple latch kept it shut. No lock, no markings. He looked at Evelyn. "Do we open it? You think Scout found a treasure chest?" Franklin popped the latch. The wood creaked. Inside were old letters, a bundle of photographs tied with string, and a small leather-bound notebook. The scent that rose from it wasn't rot. It was cedar and ink, and something human. History. The first photo showed a couple standing in front of the same shack, but not this version. In the picture, it was whole. Painted white with green trim, flower boxes in the windows, a rocking chair on the porch. They were smiling like they had built it with their bare hands and dared the world to try and take it. On the back, Henry and Lila Reeves, summer '89. Evelyn sat beside Franklin in the dirt. Her skepticism faded into something softer. She flipped through the letters while Franklin skimmed the notebook. They weren't squatters, she said. Henry was a vet. Lila taught at the elementary school in town. They fixed this place up after he came back from Iraq. The garden out back was hers. The last few entries in the notebook told a different story. Lila's illness, medical debt. Henry doing what he could, fixing fences for neighbors, patching barns, until even that wasn't enough. The final entry was dated 3 years ago. She passed in her sleep. Evelyn read aloud. Peaceful. I stayed another winter, but this place is too full of ghosts now. Franklin closed the notebook, held it in both hands for a moment, then looked at the shack. He didn't see the rot anymore. He saw bones and love and proof that something could rise here again. He stood stiffly, looked at Evelyn. We don't have to make it perfect, just livable. She said nothing for a long time. Then, I can boil water on the camp stove. If we can get the fireplace working, we might make it through a few cold nights. Franklin smiled. It wasn't victory, just agreement. By late afternoon, they had cleared a path through the main room. Franklin checked the fireplace. The chimney was intact, but needed cleaning. Evelyn pulled out the blankets and laid them flat in the sun to dry, and beat out the worst of the dust. Scout wandered the perimeter, nose twitching, tail wagging as if each lap around the building was a silent patrol. He returned each time to the spot where the box had been, sat down and watched, as if standing guard over the past, or maybe giving them permission to claim it. That night they laid out their sleeping bags on the wood floor near the hearth. No fire yet, but they stayed inside. The wind rattled the walls, but the roof held. Scout curled between them, head resting on Evelyn's ankle, his breathing slow and even, a guardian at rest. Evelyn stared up at the beams above them. This isn't shelter yet, she whispered. No, Franklin said, staring into the dark. But it's a start. Scout shifted in his sleep, and outside the trees stopped moving, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. Morning came cold and blue, the kind of cold that crept through walls like a warning. Evelyn wrapped herself in 2 flannel shirts and Franklin's old army jacket, then crouched on the kitchen side of the shack, scraping mud and rodent droppings from between the floorboards with a putty knife. Scout lay nearby, head up, eyes tracking her movements like a supervisor clocking in. He hadn't left her side all morning. Franklin was outside, hammering together a frame for what would eventually become a patch for the missing front steps. The sound of nails driving into wood echoed through the quiet like punctuation. Let me know if you fall through the floor, Franklin called through the cracked window. I'll let Scout rescue me, Evelyn answered. The dog thumped his tail once, as if accepting the assignment. She worked in silence, pausing only to shift her knees and knock dust from her gloves. That's when she noticed it. A board near the hearth, thinner than the rest, didn't sit flush. Not warped, loose, almost intentional. Scout noticed it too. His head tilted. He stood, walked over, sniffed the edge, then gave a single sharp bark. Evelyn startled. What is it, boy? Scout pawed once at the plank, then looked back at her. She leaned down, brushed the dust away, and wedged the putty knife beneath the edge. The board lifted with a reluctant groan. Beneath it was a small cavity, hollowed into the foundation. Not deep, but deliberate. Inside lay another box, not the one they'd found outside. This was older. The wood was darker, the grain smoother with time. A brass clasp kept the lid shut. No lock, just a gentle resistance, like it hadn't been opened in years. Franklin stepped in just as she opened it. What did you find? More than splinters. The box held letters, dozens, some in envelopes, others folded tight and tied with thread. Beneath them photographs, black and white, sepia. And under that, a set of blueprints, brittle from age, rolled carefully and secured with a strip of leather. Franklin sat beside her. Scout didn't move. He stood like a statue, eyes fixed on the box like he knew something holy had been disturbed. The first photo Evelyn lifted showed a younger man in uniform standing beside a woman in a cotton dress. Both beamed at the camera, backs straight, eyes bright. Behind them stood the shack, only it wasn't a shack then. Painted. Whole. A garden bloomed on one side, a chicken coop on the other. On the back of the photo, James and Marie Langford, June 1947. Home at last. Evelyn's breath caught. Franklin. He was a soldier. Franklin didn't answer. He was unrolling the blueprints. They weren't for a mansion. Just this shack, but detailed. Every beam, every joint, each room mapped with notations in tight, neat handwriting. He rebuilt it, Franklin said quietly. After the war, from scratch. Evelyn flipped through the letters. One was dated 1952. James wrote to a fellow veteran about finally finding peace in Pine Hollow. Another detailed how he built the fireplace stone by stone, using salvaged brick from an old courthouse. One letter, tear-stained and fading, described Marie's illness. And then, silence. Evelyn set it down, suddenly blinking too fast. They put their lives into this place, not just survival. They made it beautiful. Franklin looked around the room. The sun through the broken window cast stripes across the floor. Dust floated in the beams like ghosts. They didn't just build a house, he said. They left a map. Scout laid down beside the box, resting his chin on his paws. Eyes still open. Still watching. Franklin opened a notebook from the pile. More sketches. Ideas for a garden, a water collection system, insulation made from wool. People don't write like this anymore, he said. It's like he was thinking through the page. Evelyn was quiet. Then she whispered, I think they were trying to leave something behind, for someone like us. They sat for a while, surrounded by the paper remains of 2 lives now folded into their own. Finally, Franklin stood, took one of the old letters, and pinned it to the wall near the door. Then he picked up his own notepad from the truck and began sketching. What are you doing? Evelyn asked, starting over, but smarter this time. He laid the blueprint next to his own page and began to copy, altering where needed, adding notes, measurements. The fireplace stays, he muttered, and the east wall needs bracing. But if the bones are solid, we can rebuild faster than I thought. Evelyn touched the edge of the first photo. Marie Langford's smile was gentle, proud. I'll clean the hearth, she said softly. If they warmed their home here, we can too. By sundown, the shack looked the same to anyone passing by. Broken roof, half-missing walls, forgotten. But inside, a plan had begun to form. And Scout, stationed once again near the hearth, watched over it all like a sentinel. A bridge between past and present. Between what had been and what might be again. The bell above the market door jingled when Evelyn stepped inside, but no one looked up to greet her. Pine Hollow's only grocery store smelled of bleach and coffee grounds. Shelves leaned half empty, and every sound carried too far. She felt it right away, the stillness that comes when strangers walk into places they don't belong. She tried to ignore it. She picked up a basket, checked her list. Canned soup, kerosene, flour, a roll of duct tape. The basics. Franklin was back at the shack, patching the roof before the next rain. Scout had stayed behind with him, probably chasing sunlight across the floorboards. When Evelyn reached for a can of beans, a whisper rose behind her. She's the one, isn't she? The woman from that old shack. Evelyn pretended not to hear. Another voice answered, lower, meaner. Town said they've been living out there, squatting, The sheriff's been told. Her hand froze mid-air. The metal of the can felt cold as ice. She moved to the counter. The cashier, a boy no older than 17, didn't make eye contact. He scanned her items in silence. When he handed her the receipt, his smile was quick and nervous, like someone offering a truce they didn't believe in. Outside, the air was sharp and grey. 2 women stood near the post office steps, heads close together. One pointed toward Evelyn's truck. Their lips moved. Evelyn didn't need to hear the words. She'd seen that look before. The mix of pity and suspicion people reserve for those who've fallen too far to climb back. Scout would have barked, she thought. He never let silence turn ugly. By the time she drove back down the dirt road to the shack, her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She told herself it was from the cold. Franklin was on the roof, hammer in one hand, balance in the other. Scout sat on the ground below, watching like a foreman. When the truck approached, the dog ran to greet her, tail high, eyes bright. He circled the tires twice, then pressed his head against her knee when she stepped out. Town wasn't too friendly. Franklin asked without looking down. They think we're squatters. He paused mid-swing. We are, technically. Evelyn glared up. Not for long. She unloaded the groceries and silence. The sound of tin cans hitting the old table filled the room like punctuation marks in an argument they didn't want to have. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind scraped the eaves, the fire snapped. Scout stirred once, ears twitching. Franklin was still awake too, tracing lines on his makeshift blueprint by lantern light. Around midnight, Scout lifted his head and gave a soft whine. Then another. Not alarmed, expectant. Evelyn frowned. What is it, boy? Scout padded to the door, sat, and looked back at them. Someone was outside. Franklin stood, motioned for Evelyn to stay back. He opened the door just enough to see a shape standing beyond the porch light. A woman. Small. Bundled in a wool coat. In her hands, a steaming pot covered with a dish towel. Evening, she said, voice clear despite the chill. Name's Ruthie Callahan. I used to live down the road before that company started buying up everything. Franklin blinked. You're out late. I heard talk in town. Figured I'd see for myself before judging a soul. Evelyn stepped forward. You knew the people who lived here before? Ruthie smiled. Honey, I grew up with them. James and Marie Langford. Good folks. He built this place after the war. I remember when he carried the first beam up here on his back. Said he didn't want a house that wasn't made with his own sweat. Scout moved closer to Ruthie, sniffed her coat, then leaned against her leg. She laughed softly and scratched his ears. Well now, this one's got sense. Dogs don't take to bad people. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. The smell of soup drifted between them. Chicken, herbs, something that tasted like kindness. Ruthie set the pot on the table and looked around the room. You two have done more work on this place in a week than anyone's managed in a decade. Franklin lowered his gaze. We're just trying to make it livable. Ruthie's expression softened. That's exactly what James said back then. They talked by the fire. Ruthie told them about the Langfords, how Marie kept a garden that fed half the town during the bad years, how James repaired neighbors' barns without ever asking for a dime. They weren't rich, but they made everyone feel richer. Ruthie said quietly. At one point, she pulled a folded photo from her coat pocket. It showed the same couple, standing before the shack, arms around each other. I kept this after the estate sale. Couldn't stand seeing their things tossed like garbage. Evelyn traced the image with her finger. The garden in the background looked exactly like the space outside their window now, empty and waiting. You keep it, Ruthie said. Feels like it belongs here again. Before leaving, Ruthie glanced toward the fireplace. You watch out for that Bright River Company. They've got a habit of showing up where people least expect. Franklin frowned. Who are they? Ruthie tightened her scarf. Developers. Buy old land cheap, push folks out, and call it progress. That's why I live with my daughter now. They took my home 2 winters ago. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The night swallowed her footsteps. Evelyn looked at Franklin. Do you think they'll come here? He stared into the fire, the orange light flickering in his eyes. If they do, they'll find out we don't scare easy. Scout barked once, sharp and certain, as if agreeing. Outside, the woods whispered. The town might have doubted them, but inside that broken house, 3 souls and 1 loyal dog had just drawn their line. The next morning came heavy with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and turned the world to ash. Evelyn stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee, her breath hanging in the cold. Scout trailed behind her, slower than usual, his gait uneven. He stopped by the porch steps and sat down hard, like the effort had taken too much out of him. Hey, boy, she said gently, crouching beside him. You tired? He wagged his tail once, but it was weak, lazy. His eyes, usually gold bright, looked dull, clouded. He laid his head on her knee. Franklin came out carrying a coil of wire. He all right? I don't know, Evelyn whispered. He's been slowing down for days. Franklin frowned, setting the wire aside. He's just old. We'll get him checked once we got the truck running steady. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Scout didn't whine or flinch. He just looked at Franklin, calm and steady, as if telling him not to make promises he couldn't keep. That afternoon, Ruthie came back. The fog had burned off, leaving the sky pale and brittle. She carried a folder tucked under her arm, edges worn from handling. I think I found something, she said as Franklin opened the door. Took me half the night digging through my brother's old papers. She laid the folder on the table. Inside were deeds, letters, and a faded discharge form from 1946. The name matched the ones in the photographs. James Langford. He was my brother, Ruthie said softly. Older by 8 years. I never told you because I wanted to be sure. Evelyn's hand went to her chest. You're saying this place was his, built with his own hands after he came back from the Pacific. When he died, the property should have gone to me, but the paperwork got buried in the county office when Bright River started buying up parcels. I thought it was lost forever. Franklin turned the documents over carefully. These prove ownership? They prove what's right, Ruthie said, and sometimes that's enough to start a fight. She gave a faint smile that didn't quite hide the pain behind it. James loved this land. He always said it wasn't much, but it was honest. I think he'd be glad to see someone else care enough to fight for it again. Franklin nodded, jaw tight. We'll see this through. I owe him that. Scout tried to stand but stumbled. Evelyn caught him before he hit the floor. His breathing came shallow now, his ribs moving under her hands like fragile branches. Something's wrong, she whispered. He's burning up. They laid him on an old blanket by the hearth. Franklin fetched cool water, Evelyn wet a rag and dabbed his head, whispering his name over and over. Scout's eyes fluttered, searching for something that wasn't there. Hang on, boy. You hear me? You hang on. Franklin knelt beside him, his rough hands shaking. He's been with us longer than anyone else, he said. From the day I found him under that bridge, he never left me, not once. Evelyn touched his shoulder. We'll get him through this. But Franklin's eyes were fixed on the dog, wide and glistening. You don't understand. I owe him my life. He looked up at Ruthie. Back when I came home from the mill accident, I was drinking, lost. Scout found me one night in the woods. He wouldn't stop barking till someone came. That's how Evelyn found me. He laughed once, a sound without joy. Guess he's been saving us both since the start. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches against the windows like fingers tapping. Ruthie went to the truck and came back with a small bottle of veterinary pills. "My daughter works at the shelter over in Camden," she said. "Painkillers. Might help him breathe easier." Evelyn gave Scout a half-dose with water. He licked her hand weakly, then rested his head back down. His breathing steadied, slow but even. Franklin sat there long after the others went quiet. He ran a hand through Scout's fur, tracing every scar, every matted clump of dirt. "You carried us through the worst," he whispered, "and I can't do a damn thing for you now." His voice cracked on the last word. Ruthie looked away, giving him privacy. Evelyn turned toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the shack looked almost whole under the fading light. Patched roof, mended door, smoke curling thin from the chimney. But inside, the air felt heavier, like the past had reached out and laid its weight on them all. "Frank," Ruthie said gently, "when James was dying, he told me something I never forgot. He said, 'You can lose a house, but don't lose heart. That's the only thing you can rebuild from.'" Franklin wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. "Then we'll rebuild from that." Night came quietly. The three of them sat by the fire, no one speaking. Scout slept at their feet, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Ruthie's folder lay open on the table, the papers inside glowing amber under the lantern light. Outside, the woods whispered again, just like before. Only now it didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like memory. The sound of tires crunching gravel shattered the stillness just past noon. Evelyn looked up from stacking kindling. Franklin stepped out of the shed, wiping sweat from his brow. Scout raised his head from the porch, ears pricked. A black SUV rolled down the overgrown path like it didn't belong, which it didn't. Tinted windows, spotless body, clean city plates. Scout stood. The vehicle stopped just short of the front steps. Two men got out, suits, sunglasses, polished shoes caked in fresh mud. One checked his watch. The other unfolded a clipboard like it was a script. Franklin walked up slow, jaw set. "You lost?" The taller man smiled without warmth. "Actually, no. Are you Mr. Franklin Dunn?" "Who's asking?" "David Krantz. I represent Bright River Developments. We're the current owners of this property." Franklin blinked. "Come again?" The man held out a document. "We acquired this parcel in a bundle purchase from the county 6 months ago. It's part of a long-term investment project. You're currently trespassing on land legally owned by Bright River." Scout growled. Low, deep, the kind of sound that vibrated through wood. David took a step back. "Is that dog restrained?" "He's not the one who should be," Evelyn muttered, coming down the steps. She took the paper from Franklin, scanning it fast. "There's no signature," she said. "Just a stamp. The deed was certified electronically, perfectly legal." "Legal doesn't mean ethical," she snapped. The second man spoke up. "We'll give you until the end of the week to vacate. After that, we'll be forced to file for eviction through the county." "You do that," Franklin said, voice like gravel. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." David added, trying to soften his tone. "You've got a day or two at best before we start development. Maybe take this time to move on, yeah?" Scout took a step forward. David backed up again. "I'd leave before he makes that decision for you," Franklin said. The men returned to their SUV. The vehicle reversed down the drive faster than it had come in, wheels spitting dirt. Silence rushed in behind them, almost too loud. Inside, Evelyn tossed the fake deed on the table. "This is wrong. Bright River's been involved in cases like this before. I remember the name." Franklin sat down hard. What kind of cases? Land grabs, shady acquisitions. They target vulnerable owners, usually elderly or off the grid, claim something lapsed in the paperwork, then buy the land out from under them. Ruthie, who had come in halfway through the exchange, turned pale. That's what happened to James's parcel. Evelyn looked at her. You think they forged it? I think they found the gap before we did and jumped through it. Scout was still standing at the door, watching the road like the threat might circle back. His tail was stiff, his shoulders tight, and his eyes locked on something far beyond the trees. We need help, Franklin said. Real help. Ruthie hesitated, then went to the drawer beneath the old stove. She pulled out a yellowing Rolodex and flipped through it, fingers shaking only slightly. I know someone, she said finally. If he's still alive, he'll take this personal. Who? Evelyn asked. Lowell, Ruthie said. Judge Lowell. He was a thorn in Bright River's side back in the 80s. Retired now, lives out near Copper Hollow. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. We've got one shot. If this gets into county court before we've got papers filed... I'll call him, Ruthie said, already dialing the rotary phone. If anyone can find a crack in their foundation, it's him. That night, Evelyn sat on the porch with Scout. He had returned to his usual spot, but the way he sat, alert, still, felt different. You felt them before we did, didn't you? She whispered. He blinked, slow. She laid a hand on his back, felt the warmth of his fur, the way his muscles remained coiled, even now. We're not running, she said, more to herself than him. Not this time. Inside, Franklin worked at the kitchen table, spreading out every document Ruthie had brought over. Deeds, letters, old war photos with dates scribbled on the back, a copy of James Langford's will, handwritten, naming Ruthie as next of kin. We'll build a case, Franklin muttered. Line by line, truth by truth. By the time Ruthie returned, the sky was dark and quiet again. He's coming, she said. Lowell's coming tomorrow. Franklin looked up. You sure? He remembered James, said this sounded exactly like Bright River, and he hates unfinished business. Scout gave a soft huff from the porch, like he approved. Evelyn looked towards the woods, where the SUV had disappeared hours ago. The shadows felt thicker tonight. Not just the dark, but the sense that something had shifted. Something had entered their world, and Scout had smelled it first. By sunrise, Judge Lowell had set up shop in Ruthie's kitchen. The old man, still wiry in his mid-70s, wore a denim jacket over a crisp collared shirt, a bolo tie fastened tight at his throat. He moved with purpose, flipping through papers, drawing lines on maps, speaking names like they still held weight in court. This is no simple eviction, he said, jabbing a page with his pen. It's a pattern, and it smells like racketeering. Franklin leaned over the table. You sure? Lowell didn't blink. Bright River has a history. They don't build homes, they build shell companies, then sell the land at triple price to insiders. In the meantime, they scare folks off, usually the ones who can't fight back. Ruthie poured coffee for the 4th time that morning. You think we can stop them? I think if we act fast and smart, we can do more than that. Lowell said. We can expose them. Evelyn had already driven into town. By mid-morning, she was back, with flyers, printed forms, and a fierce gleam in her eye. We start today, she said. Every signature counts. That afternoon, they stood outside Mill Creek General Store, Franklin, Evelyn, Ruthie, and Judge Lowell, surrounded by townspeople. A folding table held the petition. At the center sat a hand-drawn sign. Protect our land. Stop Bright River. Franklin didn't speak much, but his presence alone drew attention. And Scout was the real magnet. He sat beside the table like a statue carved from loyalty itself, his golden coat gleaming in the sunlight, eyes steady, alert. People came to pet him, and in doing so, paused long enough to read the papers. By the end of the first hour, they had 70 signatures. By dusk, over 200. That night, a young woman named Lizzie came to the cabin with a flash drive. She was a paralegal from the next town over, barely 25, eyes red from staring at a screen. "I heard what you're doing," she said. "You should see this." Lowell plugged it into his ancient laptop. What popped up made the air in the room go still. Dozens of scanned affidavits, elderly residents, multiple counties, stories echoing the same words, forced removal, forged documents, threats from strangers, lost homes. Bright River's name appeared again and again, sometimes buried behind subsidiaries, sometimes front and center. Ruthie pressed her hand to her mouth. "This is bigger than us." Lowell nodded. "This isn't just a land dispute. This is a national playbook." Franklin exhaled through his nose. "So we go bigger." Scout was pacing now, sensing the tension. Evelyn knelt beside him, steadying his head in her hands. "Stay with us, buddy," she whispered. "We're not done yet." The next morning, the story broke online. Lizzie had sent the files to a local reporter who'd once been fired for exposing a real estate scam. He still carried a grudge and wasn't afraid to swing it. The headline read, "Developers accused of elder abuse across state lines. Is Bright River behind it all?" It exploded within hours. By evening, the mayor of Mill Creek, normally a cautious man, called for an emergency town meeting. He stood on the courthouse steps, microphone trembling in his hand, and addressed a crowd larger than the town parade. "We won't stand by while our neighbors are robbed blind," he said. "This land matters. These people matter." He paused. "And so does that dog." He pointed toward Scout, who stood beside Franklin and Evelyn like a sentinel carved from faith. "He warned us before we saw the danger. He knew. He stood watch. If we can't be loyal to that kind of loyalty, what are we even doing here?" The crowd erupted in applause. Later that night, Franklin sat by the fire, Scout curled beside him. The dog had been quieter today. Tired, but not sick. Just worn. The kind of tired that comes from being too alert for too long. "You knew they weren't right," Franklin murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You always know." Scout let out a long sigh and rested his head on Franklin's boot. Outside, wind rustled the pines. Somewhere in the dark, a new fear was growing. In boardrooms, in inboxes, in legal offices that once thought no one would fight back. But this time, they weren't just fighting. They were exposing. And Scout was no longer just a dog. He was a symbol, a reminder, that sometimes the ones who don't speak are the first to tell the truth. The courthouse was packed. People from Mill Creek spilled out onto the sidewalk, some holding homemade signs, others simply standing with folded arms and clenched jaws. It wasn't just about a land dispute anymore. It was about the line in the dirt between decency and greed. Inside, Judge Lowell sat beside Franklin and Evelyn at the front table, suit slightly wrinkled, eyes sharp as ever. Across the aisle, the Bright River legal team wore tailored suits and tired smirks, as if they'd seen this show before and always knew the ending. But today was different. The moment the hearing began, the atmosphere shifted. Evelyn took the stand first. She didn't speak like a lawyer, but like someone who'd been forced to defend her life with her bare hands. Her voice didn't shake. Her words landed heavy, deliberate. "They didn't serve us properly. They didn't notify us legally. They thought because we were old, we'd give up. But we didn't." Then came the evidence. Lizzie's files, compiled into a clean presentation by Lowell's paralegal nephew, lit up the projector like wildfire. Each affidavit, each forged signature, each corporate shell Bright River had hidden behind. It all came crashing down under the white glow of courtroom truth. Whispers spread like brushfire. Then a new witness appeared. Mrs. Helen Travers, 92, wheelchair-bound, former resident of a Bright River-targeted senior complex in Kansas. She had flown in with her grandson overnight. No one expected her. No one was ready for her voice. They came with clipboards and fake kindness, she said, her voice raspy but clear. Then one morning, they said my home was no longer mine. I slept in my grandson's garage for 6 months. By the time she wheeled off the stand, half the room was in tears. Franklin hadn't spoken yet. But now he stood. He walked slow, stiff from years of pain and recent months of tension. But he didn't use the cane today. Scout was beside him. The old shepherd had grown weaker by the day. His steps were slower, his eyes cloudier. But when Franklin moved, he moved. The bailiff started to object, then looked into Franklin's face and stopped. Franklin said just one sentence. "I didn't ask for a fight, but my dog knew we had one." He sat back down, and Scout laid beside his feet, head resting on the toe of Franklin's boot. The courtroom fell into silence. Then the judge cleared his throat. "I've seen land disputes before. I've seen corporations weaponize procedure, but what I've seen here is systemic abuse dressed up as development." He paused. "To the plaintiffs, Franklin and Evelyn Bishop, this court finds you the lawful residents of Parcel 14B. All attempts to remove you were made through unlawful and deceptive means." The room held its breath. "As for Bright River Developments," he continued, "this court is referring your actions to the State Attorney General's office for further investigation under potential fraud and elder exploitation." And just like that, it was over. Or rather, it was just beginning. Outside, cheers erupted. Reporters swarmed. Franklin and Evelyn were offered interviews, but they waved them off. They had no interest in the spotlight. Their eyes were on Scout. He was swaying now, not from pride, from exhaustion. Franklin crouched beside him, whispering something only Scout could hear. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his back. Then, in a quiet moment amidst the storm of victory, a court officer approached with a sealed envelope. "Your deed," he said. Franklin took it with shaking hands, and Scout, tired, grey-muzzled, bones aching, rose to his feet. One last time, just long enough to press his head into Franklin's side as the envelope passed between them. It wasn't about paper. It wasn't about land. It was about standing your ground, holding the line. And Scout had held it with everything he had left. That night, back at the cabin, Ruthie lit a fire. The town had sent food, candles, cards. Franklin sat in his chair, Scout curled at his feet, breathing shallow but peaceful. Evelyn watched the flames dance, her fingers grazing the edge of the deed. "This land isn't just ours," she said quietly. "It's his too." Franklin didn't reply. He was looking at Scout, eyes glassed with pride and sorrow. Outside, the night wind rustled the trees. Scout didn't bark. He didn't need to anymore. 6 months passed. The structure that was once a sagging, wind-bitten shack had transformed. Gone were the tarps and duct tape. In their place stood a warm, cedar-sided cottage with a wide porch, flower beds carved from old timber, and a carved sign above the door that read, "The Hollow Light." But this wasn't just a home anymore. It had become something else. A place where broken things were mended, not just with nails and hammers, but with trust. Franklin still rose early. The pain in his hips hadn't gone anywhere, but something else had settled in. Purpose. He spent most mornings at the shed, showing a rotating crew of young men how to square a joint or sharpen a chisel. They came from all over, a 20-year-old fresh out of juvie, a quiet boy with a stutter, a war vet with tremors in his hands. None of them said much when they arrived, but over time, the noise of hammers and the smell of sawdust loosened the silence. Franklin didn't lecture, he just worked, and slowly they followed. Across the main path. Evelyn ran the medical room, if you could call it that. It was more of a converted storage space with shelves of donated supplies, a cot, and a small sink. But people came. Some were just tired. Others had nowhere else to go. Evelyn didn't ask why. She offered bandages, soup, a chair to rest. Sometimes that was enough. Every Wednesday night they held an open meal. The table was built by Franklin's crew, long and imperfect, but strong. Locals came now, not just to donate, but to sit, eat, talk. Trust had taken root in this soil. And Scout? Scout hadn't changed much, but that was the miracle. His walk was slower, his legs stiff. But every evening around 5, as the light tipped golden across the ridge, Scout padded his way to the porch. He took the same spot, left side of the door, chin on his paws, eyes watching the woods like the world might still need guarding. People often paused to greet him, veterans who saw something familiar in his eyes, children who asked if he was famous. Famous, Franklin once said, chuckling. He's more than that. He's trusted. One afternoon, a social worker named Devon arrived with a woman in her 60s, hunched from sleeping in her car. Her name was Lorraine. She had once been a nurse, too. Alzheimer's had taken parts of her memory, but not her kindness. Devon looked uncertain. She's been moved 3 times in 6 months, doesn't stay long anywhere. Evelyn simply took Lorraine's hand. You can stay as long as you need, she said. That night, Lorraine sat on the porch beside Scout. The dog pressed his head lightly against her knee, and for a moment her shoulders loosened. Franklin watched from the workshop window. He knew that look, the look of someone not yet healed, but no longer afraid. Later that week, a man came up the ridge with a clipboard. He wore a suit, shiny shoes, and corporate charm. Claimed to be a new rep from Bright River's parent company. Said they were re-evaluating local projects. Franklin didn't blink. We're not a project, he said. We're a home. Then Scout rose. Not growling, not barking, just standing. The man looked down at him, then back at Franklin. He folded the clipboard, said thank you, and walked back the way he came. The next day, a donation arrived in the mail from a private source, anonymous, substantial, with one line written in careful cursive. For the dog who didn't stand down. That night, Evelyn framed it and hung it above Scout's bed. Franklin walked out onto the porch at sunset, carrying a steaming mug. Scout was already there, as always. Franklin sat beside him. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because every board in the floor, every carved beam overhead, every laugh from the dining hall behind them was proof. They had rebuilt not just walls, but something far rarer. They had rebuilt trust, and Scout had guarded every nail of it. The gravel path wound gently up the hill, curving through the fall-burnished oaks like a quiet invitation. A yellow school bus rumbled to a stop near the wooden gate, its door folding open with a soft hiss. Out spilled a group of 6th graders from Briar Hollow Elementary, clutching notebooks, whispering excitedly, nudging one another as their shoes crunched against the path. Their teacher, Ms. Callahan, adjusted her lanyard and smiled nervously. They had come for a tour of the home built from love. It wasn't just a shelter, or a workshop, or a halfway house. It was a story carved into timber and healed into earth. Franklin stood near the porch, leaning on a cane now, not out of weakness but habit. Evelyn was beside him, clipboard in hand. She had tied her hair back in a loose ponytail, white strands streaking through the brown like trails of light through dusk. And Scout was already waiting. He lay on the left side of the porch. His spot. His fur had grayed into the soft color of stone, and his eyes were clouded now, but his ears still flicked toward every sound. He didn't rise anymore when strangers approached, but he didn't need to. His presence spoke louder than steps ever could. "Who's that?" one boy asked, pointing. "That," Evelyn said, stepping forward, "is Scout. He's the reason this place exists." The kids went silent, even the rowdy ones. "Is he a war dog?" another asked. Franklin chuckled softly. "Not officially, but he's seen more than most generals." They led the group through the grounds, the woodworking shed where sawdust clung to beams like cinnamon, the communal garden where tomatoes hung like ornaments, and the bunkhouse where warm quilts lined the beds, each stitched by hand. At the old hearth, they stopped. Evelyn rested her hand on the mantel. This all started with one dog, and two people who'd lost their home. A girl with thick braids raised her hand. "Do dogs really know when something's wrong?" The group quieted again. Even the birds in the trees seemed to hush. Evelyn looked over her shoulder. Scout lay still, his head resting on his paws. But his ears perked the slightest bit at the sound of her voice, like they always did when she said his name. She smiled, not sadly, but with reverence. "He didn't bark for food," she said. "He barked for the truth." A long pause. Then the girl scribbled something quickly in her notebook. Evelyn noticed, but didn't ask what. That evening, after the kids left and dusk rolled in like slow smoke across the hills, Franklin sat with Scout on the porch. The wind had cooled. "You know," Franklin murmured, sipping tea, "they ask about you more than they ask about us." Scout didn't move, but his eyes were open. The stars began to show, first just one, then two, then 100, scattered like secrets across the sky. Behind them, Evelyn pinned a new photo to the bulletin board inside the common room. It showed the group of children from earlier, huddled around Scout. Some smiling, some just watching. Below the photo was a handwritten card, taped carefully. It read, "Thank you for showing us that home isn't just a place, it's a dog who never gave up." Outside, Scout shifted slightly, resting his chin on Franklin's boot. The old man didn't flinch. He just reached down, gently brushing his fingers across the back of the shepherd's neck. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called. But the porch remained still, guarded, watched, loved. Because Scout wasn't just a survivor, he was a sentinel, a memory, a truth no one could deny. And as the porch light flickered on above them, the world exhaled. He was still watching, still guarding, just like always. What about you? Have you ever been saved by loyalty? What's your story? With a dog that never gave up? If Scout's story touched your heart, help us share more stories like his. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel where loyalty lives on.